Hello, pattern readers. I am very excited to finally have some official Wheel of Time Season 2 casting news to share with you today. First off, let me assure you that this video will be safe for you to watch as long as you have seen Season 1 of the TV show. I will avoid giving any details that would spoil the reading experience if you haven't finished reading the books yet. JordanCon 2022 is happening as we speak, and for that event, showrunner Rafe Judkins confirmed the casting for fan favorite character Aviendha. She will appear in season 2, and she will be played by Irish actress Ayoola Smart. I am pre-recording this video, so at the time I'm recording this, the announcement hasn't happened yet, but I won't release this until the announcement is out there. So I will be sharing any relevant links, whatever those may be. Check in the description so you can see the confirmation for this casting. Edited to squee about the fact that Rafe also said that Ayoola is rehearsing an iconic fight scene as Aviendha on this set they're in Morocco right now. And he talked about what she had to learn to do the fighting skills as an Aiel, wearing a veil, the whole bit. Let the speculation begin. So I recently did a video where I talked about the rumored casting of Ayoola Smart. And now that we have confirmation, I am really excited to know that she really will be playing Aviendha, because that was the fan favorite theory about who she might be playing. And so I got really excited about that idea once I got introduced to this actress. And now that we have the confirmation, I've done a little further digging. I want to share some more information with you about the actress and also give a little bit more background on the character and what we know about the culture that she is from, the Aiel. So the Aiel are an extremely important culture overall in the Wheel of Time series, and we got a few mentions of them in season 1. So I want to just remind everybody of that, like what we know in the show so far about the Aiel and who they are and what we might be able to expect from them going forward. This information comes from primarily there are references in episodes 3, 5, and 7 of season 1. And so it's information from the episodes themselves, but also there's a little bit of information in terms of trivia that they included in the X-ray feature. So that might be something a little bit extra above and beyond the lines that were in the show. However, I still think that is fair game information since the show was providing that for us in season 1. So I'm going to include that. All of that can also be found in the Show Wiki. I just want you to be careful if you're looking around online for information. It can be very tricky if you're trying to avoid book spoilers. There actually are 2 different wikis, one for the books and one for the show. So if you're a show watcher and you haven't read either some or all of the books, you definitely want to stay away from the book wiki. The show wiki is safe for you. But if you accidentally found your way into the book wiki, let's say you looked up Aviendha, don't do that. Definitely, if you haven't read the books, don't look up an entry for Aviendha on the book wiki. It'll spoil everything. So I just want you to know you can look at the show wiki. I'll link that for you, but be very careful. The first information we get about the Aiel comes in episode 3, when we see a dead Aielman on display in a cage in the town of Breen Spring, where Rand and Matt find themselves. Matt in particular seems pretty intrigued by this, and he comes back later to look more closely at the body, and that is when Tom Maryland confronts him, and we find out that Matt is thinking about taking anything that might be valuable from this body out of desperation. And Tom seems very familiar, at least relatively speaking, with the Aiel, and he gives us some information that we wouldn't otherwise know. Before we get into that, though, I do want to stress that in general, people who are not Aiel don't tend to know a ton about the Aiel, and there is a reason for that. The location where they live is in a desert area to the east part of the continent. And in fact, it's east of this mountain range, which is known as the spine of the world. And it's very difficult to cross. Most people don't ever cross it. The area where they live, the Aiel themselves refer to as the threefold land, whereas anybody who is not an Aiel would call it the Aiel Waste. And the Aiel refer to anyone who is non-Aiel as wetlanders, because they live in this very dry, dangerous desert area, and all of the lands west of the spine of the world have much more significant bodies of water that they're not used to seeing, so they call them the wetlands. Because there's very little trade that happens between Aiel and wetlanders, most people, again, are not very familiar with them. They might have heard some pretty wild tales about them, but in terms of actually knowing much about their culture, probably not much. Tom is going to be a little bit unusual in that sense, and being a gleeman, he would certainly seek out information about all kinds of cultures, including the Aiel, and he may have had reasons in his travels to have more accurate information than some. So what do we find out from Tom? Well, we find out that red hair is common among Aiel and apparently pretty relatively uncommon among anyone who's not an Aiel. And then we also find out that this particular Aielman was apparently killed for being who he was, for being Aiel, and that a lot of people seem to be afraid of Aielmen, but again, don't have good knowledge. So Tom points out that this man was not wearing his veil over his face, which means he wasn't going to kill anybody. On the other hand, if he had been wearing his veil over his face, he would be very dangerous indeed. Tom apparently knows a little bit more about their culture because after he has buried the man with the help of Matt, he says the words, "Rest, warrior of the threefold land, may your soul find water and shade." Now, water and shade are extremely important among the Aiel because they are so scarce in the threefold land. Then in episode 5, we have another reference to the Aiel. When Rand meets the Ogier, Loyal, Loyal immediately assumes that Rand is an Aielman. And he's basing this off of two physical characteristics that Rand has. The red hair, of course, as we've already learned, that is common among the Aiel and relatively rare among anyone else. Also, Rand's height would place him in good stead amongst the Aiel, who are considered a much taller than average people. Now, Loyal might not know quite as much about the Aiel as he thinks he does, because there are certainly some aspects of the way that Rand is dressed that would point away from him being Aiel. And as Rand says, he was raised in the Two Rivers, so regardless of what we later find out about Rand's history, he was not raised in the Aiel culture. But it's certainly an interesting bit of foreshadowing that we do get at that moment. But the greatest sense we get of who the Aiel are actually comes in episode 7, starting with the cold open, where we see a pregnant woman in labor who is fighting on a snowy mountainside several men of an opposing army. This woman is Rand's birth mother, as we find out, and she is also a maiden of the spear. Now, that requires a little bit of explanation, and I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds of the various aspects of Aiel society. I'm sure more of that will come, but it's worth understanding just basically that the Aiel have different ways of dividing themselves into groups. For instance, they have clans, and within those clans, they have smaller groups called septs. And then apart from those, they also have what are called warrior societies. And these can cross clan and sept, and there's different groups that exist within their military side of their culture. So the Maidens of the Spear are a warrior society, and it's made up only of women. So we get a sense of what Maidens of the Spear can do when we watch Tigraine fight in this way. It is certainly impressive. So knowing that, and when I tell you that the character of Aviendha is also a Maiden of the Spear, will give you an idea of how much of a badass fighter she is likely to be as well. So there's actually quite a bit more going on in these scenes of Rand's mother fighting, giving birth, and dying. There's a bit more context going on here, and a little bit of that is given in the trivia for this episode. I am sure we're going to learn more of that later, but just the gist of it is 20 years prior to the beginning of this story occurred a huge event, which most people will call the Aiel War. The Aiel themselves don't call it that, but what happened essentially is the Aiel en masse crossed over the spine of the world to right a wrong as they saw it. They had had an alliance with the nation of Cairhien, which we haven't really been introduced to at all yet, but the king at the time of that country had broken a promise that they had between them, and they saw the need for taking vengeance, specifically on this king. Now, they weren't coming to have any kind of vengeance with anybody else. They weren't looking to start a war, but nevertheless, that is what happened, a pretty significant conflict. And so if any people are going to have any familiarity with the Aiel, it probably stems from that conflict. And certainly anyone that has ever fought them in battle will have enormous respect for their ability as warriors. This battle that we see a bit of is actually the final battle of that conflict. It is known as the Battle of the Shining Walls and also sometimes referred to as the Blood Snow. And it was at that fateful time that baby Rand came into the world, and he was taken by Tam Althor after the death of his birth mother. And all of this took place in that final battle on the slopes of Dragonmount, right near Tarvalon. So that's essentially what we know about the Aiel so far. But they are a very important group of people in this series, as I have mentioned. Now, they don't actually come into play much in book 2, a little bit, and then a little bit more in book 3. And then in book 4, they really become a very important focus of the series from that point on. Now, the character of Aviendha specifically is introduced in book 3, and again, a much more significant presence in book 4 and onward. And she is a fan favorite character. Now, without going into too much specifics about what her role in the story will be, it is a very important one, and she ends up having really deep connections to quite a number of main characters. So a lot of fans have really been anticipating this casting. As I've mentioned, she is a Maiden of the Spear. And so that gives us a little bit of an idea about her abilities, but they go beyond even that without going into spoilers. She is very much a part of the Aiel culture, and she becomes really a window into our understanding as the audience, the reader, into that culture. We learn a lot about it through her as a character. And then we see her put in lots of situations where her culture might put her at odds with someone else. And so there's a lot of interesting things that come to play with that, and her dealing with her culture and how it's going to change and be shaped throughout the series. So let's talk a bit more about the actress Ayoola Smart. I've been really impressed with what I've been able to see of her work so far. Even though she is a very young actress and is relatively new in her career, I think she has a fairly impressive resume thus far. And she has worked in theater, TV, and film. And I always love to see that range of experience, especially someone that does have theater experience in addition to screen work. In terms of her TV performances, I was able to watch the first episode of the series Smother, which is on Peacock, and that was interesting to see. And then most notably beyond that, she was also in the third series of Killing Eve. I haven't seen that. I was able to watch the full feature film called Juliet Naked, which she had a pretty important supporting role in that film. And you can watch that on Pluto TV if you're interested. I really enjoyed the film in general, just even beyond Ayoola Smart's performance, but it was really great to see her in that role. I think what impressed me most is that she was mostly acting opposite the actor Ethan Hawke, who is an older, certainly far more experienced actor in comparison to her, but she really played very well in those scenes and the way she was really commanding in her screen presence especially. I just really love to see it. It was very believable. I think that can be a tough thing to do for a young actor to just kind of step into a role like that, and she did a wonderful job. So I was very impressed, enjoyed watching her in it, was always, wanting to see more of that character on screen. So I'll provide some links for you to some video reels as well as other links of things that you can watch for this actress. And I definitely recommend that if you're curious about her. Everything I've seen of her, I've been impressed with seeing her on screen. And so I'm very excited to see her in this role that I know is going to be a character I'm going to enjoy. So I couldn't really end this video without bringing up something that is bound to come up in the fandom. If you are active at all in any online spaces for the Wheel of Time fandom, you'll know that unfortunately every time there has been a casting announcement for any character who is played by a person of color, there's always some discussion around that and people who are unhappy with those casting choices. And so I'm sure this is going to be no exception, and I can definitely anticipate it being a bigger deal for some of these types of people you see interacting in the fandom. I have talked about those kinds of things at length in other videos, and I just want to make very clear in this one as well that I absolutely love the casting thus far for this show. I think that every actor, from small parts to large parts, have been exceptionally well chosen and have really nailed their parts. And I think it's really important to remember that there are many actors, regardless of whether we're talking about a difference in skin tone or not, there are many actors who have been cast thus far who don't match some key physical trait that was described in the books. And in the end, it doesn't matter at all, because it really comes down to, can this person embody the character? And from what I've seen in season 1, every one of them nailed it. There was not a poor casting choice that I saw in the entire season. You can talk about maybe other decisions that didn't work as well as they should have, and I think a lot of those are fair, but for me, I don't have a single negative thing to say about the casting. The way I look at it, I think the approach they seem to be taking is to have a flexible approach in terms of the physical characteristics as described in the books and who they're going to be looking for in casting. That they're going to look at a broad range of people, whether they match a particular physical characteristic that the book characters describe as having or not. And in the end, they're going to pick the actor that most embodies the character. And that's perfect in my mind, because in the end, those physical characteristics just don't matter that much. Like, does it matter that Rosamund Pike is quite a bit taller and does not match the coloring that Moiraine is described as having in the book? No, it doesn't matter, because she's a brilliant actress and she is totally embodying Moiraine. And yes, they are taking some steps with costuming, makeup, hair, etc., to make her look more like the character is described. And you could point to any number of characters where that is the case. You have Yosha Stradowski, who is playing Rand, is not apparently a natural redhead, but they made him a redhead in the show because that's kind of an important thing. And beyond that, does it really matter whether this character is taller than that character? A lot of those things, they just don't matter. But I guarantee you, because the Aiel are typically described as having often red hair or else some other lighter color of hair, like blonde, and they usually have lighter colored eyes as well, blue, green, and so on. Dark eyes are not unheard of, but definitely uncommon among the Aiel. At the same time, they also have sun-darkened skin. Now, I always read that and thought, that's a pretty unusual genetic combination that we don't really see too often in real life. But you know what? It doesn't really matter, because the genetics of the third age of this story don't necessarily have to exactly match our genetics. We're separated by thousands of years. And so you can describe something that isn't all that common to see in reality, but you see among this group of people. And so how do you go about casting that? Again, I would do the same thing, where you have a little bit of flexibility and then you use hair, makeup, costuming to try to create a cohesive look among these people. And I suspect that that's exactly what they're going to do. Now, as far as Ayoola Smart goes, if you look and see, she often wears her hair in a reddish color or tone. I don't know how much that is her own hair color, if that's just a color that she often wears, but you can really see that in a lot of the roles she plays. There's a reddish or lighter kind of tone to her hair, and I think they can play that up very easily. Just lean a little bit into that red coloring of her hair, and it's going to be great, especially with all the costuming and so on that we're going to see. But ultimately, again, I think it comes down to, can an actor embody the character? Do they have the skill? And from what I've seen of her, I feel very excited to see what she's going to do. So anyway, that's my general philosophy on these things. I'm sure people are going to be saying all kinds of nasty things, and those are probably people who, didn't like this show very much anyway. That's fine. So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I know that kind of negativity is going to be out there. It's unclear to me why some of these people are still so invested in something they apparently don't like. I'm invested because I like the show. And in terms of the casting, as I've said, I think the choices have been spot on. I have a lot of confidence in that department. Maybe I have some criticisms of some other aspects of the show, but not when it comes to casting. So I'm really excited for this one. And I have a feeling that it's going to be another spot on choice. And again, embodying the character, not naturally having the exact perfect physical characteristics, is what is most important. Also, I know there are a lot of you out there in the fandom that were really excited about the possibility of this casting choice. And now that we know that it is confirmed, I'm excited with all of you. I think this is going to be brilliant, and I can't wait for more season 2 news because we definitely haven't had a ton of it. But that said, filming for season 2 seems to be drawing to a close relatively soon. In the meantime, though, we do have some indication that Ayoola Smart is likely to be in Morocco for whatever is left of the filming there. So that is another exciting thing that might give us a little bit of insight into what might be happening in season 2. I'll definitely be giving you any more exciting updates as they come up. I would love to hear your thoughts on this casting and what you are excited to see in season 2. Let me know in the comments. Also, if you're not a subscriber, please do turn on notifications. That's the best way to not miss any new Wheel of Time content that I do put out. So thanks for watching. You came in peace, now depart in peace.